Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm sure we've all had our own challenges in navigating this season of extended lockdown. I know that is true of me. So I've asked Joe Alberts and Sophie Bingham just to have a conversation on how we might handle this season and cope well in this season. Joe and Sophie are both qualified psychologists, and I'm sure we'll gain a lot of wisdom from what they have to say to us. So over to you, Joe and Sophie.
Hey Sophie, you know, it's a real privilege to be here this morning to talk about the people that we serve who are going through a really tough time. And thank you for the opportunity to do that.
My pleasure, Joe. I must say it's really quite a privilege for me to be here to chat with you this evening and just to have this conversation together where we can hopefully explore some thoughts and ideas about how we can support the people in our community.
Yeah. You know, I believe that most of us are going to look back at this time and realize that this was probably the most challenging time of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, we've been created with this amazing ability to respond to challenge. And we've all heard about that fight and flight response. You know, we've got adrenaline going on inside of us when there's a challenge. And this is exactly what is happening at the moment. We are in a challenging situation, COVID, and our body is responding as it should. So our heartbeat is a little bit faster, and our breathing is a little bit different. And as a result, we struggle to sleep a bit more, and maybe our humor is, you know, we just lose our temper a little bit quicker.
Yep, absolutely. I think a lot of us over the last season have experienced enormous fluctuations in our feelings and in our emotions just in dealing with this current climate. So it's definitely been a very challenging time for lots of people and for good reason. People are talking now about this COVID fatigue. So I think people are really finding it's dragging on, and it's certainly challenging us and the way in which we're coping and the way in which we're able to face each day.
So, and you know, when my heart beats a bit faster and I breathe a little bit faster, then we feel anxious. But it's not only that. People experience loss. You know, from a lockdown perspective, it's a loss of freedom, a loss of doing things that I really enjoy doing. But then there are people who have lost more than that. They've lost financial freedom because they lost their jobs.
That's right.
And there are even people who have lost connection with family and friends who are now in different states and overseas. And we know that, likewise, when we experience loss, we have grief. And grief makes us feel sad and low and sometimes a little bit dark inside. And I guess that's a message that I really want to bring across, is that all of us, when we feel anxious at times, when we struggle to sleep, when we feel a bit sad, when we feel it's a little bit like we lost our way, we should say we are actually normal.
That's exactly right. Joe,
we are responding just in the way that we should respond.
I've spoken to very, very few people, I think, lately who are not coping or who are coping really well. So most people I speak to are actually really struggling and are finding that experience of grief and loss very challenging. And I think coupled with that is this experience of intense disappointment. So people are disappointed that so many opportunities have been lost over this season, disappointed about the loss of relationships and the loss of significant financial losses that people have experienced, and all sorts of other grief and loss that really challenges the way they're able to just process and cope day by day. People are struggling to cope, I think, in lots
So
of
the
ways.
message is love yourself, accept yourself.
Yeah.
Don't be too disappointed in the way that you are responding, because that's in a big way how we were created.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
I wonder, maybe, despite the fact that we are going to respond like this. What do you think? Are there things that we can do to make surviving in these times better?
Yeah, well, I think what you highlighted just then is really significant, just to accept some of those feelings, because a lot of us are sitting in a really sad and dark place at the moment, and that's challenging. But I think to acknowledge that and to accept that is helpful. But we know that God has created us with these bodies and these brains that we do have some control over.
Okay.
And I think during this season there are so many things in our lives that are outside of our control, and that brings a lot of frustration and a lot of anger sometimes for people.
Yeah.
But I do think it's helpful to acknowledge that there are things that we can do to support our lives and to support ourselves and our bodies during this time that can help us cope. So in my work, I work a lot with children and with teenagers, and quite often in my discussions with them over the last couple of months, I've just found that a lot of the basics have been overlooked. So really simple things like our diet or our sleep or our exercise, all of those basic things that sometimes we can routinely just take for granted if we're doing those things well. Sometimes they've been overlooked over the last little while. So, and look, I know, Joe, that this stuff is not rocket science. I know that this is not, anything that's, phenomenally interesting and exciting for people to listen to, but I think it's worth bringing it back to their mind and bring it back to their way of thinking and to address some of that stuff really intentionally. So, look, I chat to a lot of the students that I work with, and they talk to me about, a simple thing like their diet throughout the day or throughout the week. And look, I think it's really important that we highlight that good food, fruit and vegetables and lean meats and all of those things. I mean, I'm no dietitian, but just some of those basics really need to be addressed. And look, just drinking lots of water. So I think it's important that people are mindful that they're not overeating during this time, certainly not drinking too much alcohol, and just finding a balance with some of those things. So I think that's really important. Look, the whole exercise regime that people are looking at and thinking through during this time is really worth highlighting for people. I love that little catchphrase, movement is medicine. So I think we know that there's a really strong connection between our bodies and our brains and what we do and how we feel. So I think exercise has been a really critical thing that a lot of people have been using lately to produce those endorphins and to produce all those happy hormones that we know can really help us get us through some of those difficult times. So I think exercise has been really critical for people as they cope. And look, I mean, the other thing is sleep, which we can't overestimate. We could do a whole seminar on sleep, couldn't we, Joe? But look, I guess just remembering that, adopting really healthy sleep hygiene is a really important thing that people can do during this time. Be mindful of routines and the sleep that they engage in, and just, I guess, just being mindful that, as we work and think and play during the day, our brains are producing a lot of waste, and a lot of that waste can clog some of the neural pathways that we have. And we know that sleep actually clears that waste away and helps us to think clearly and to think rationally and to problem solve. So I think most people are pretty cranky and irritable when they're sleep deprived. So I think that's something worth really being attentive to during this time. And look, the other thing I guess I do often work through with the students that I work with is just this whole idea of routine. So I think during this whole COVID season, there's been a real lack of, predictability about our day and about our week and about the time ahead. And so I think it's important for us to function well, for us to have a routine in our day. So little things like getting up at a decent time and eating meals at regular times, and just having just some structure and predictability built into our day so we know what comes ahead. So I don't know if that's something that you've come across in the work that you've done with the
definitely.
adults.
Yeah. Like we would assume that people would sort of fill their day, but then you discover that some of my clients would say, I sort of get up later than normal, and then by the time I go to bed, I really feel a bit empty inside because it feels I didn't achieve much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really want to emphasize what you said about structure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it feels a bit artificial,
Yeah.
but plan that day.
Yeah.
I'm going to get up at such and such a time.
Yeah.
And for tomorrow, I would like to accomplish, the following.
Mm.
One of those things that I think we should definitely be planning for is pleasant activity.
And lots of them.
And lots of them. Because we know that when we engage in a pleasant activity, just from a hormonal point of view, wonderful things happen in our body. And we feel good and we feel stimulated and we feel we are sort of, achieving something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, an interesting thing about our brain is that when we are stressed or when we are anxious, our thinking brain is actually switched off, So I'm stressed and anxious and I feel a bit stuck and I don't know what to do. And it's very helpful for that anxious brain to be triggered and a bit stimulated by something, which let's call that a list of pleasant activities. So people will really benefit by taking a bit of time, and maybe they would sit down with a loved one and say, let me make a list of things that I have done in the past, that when I did them, it really made me feel good. Now, for me personally, bushwalking is right up there.
Right, lovely.
The second one would be fishing, but unfortunately, that's one of my losses and griefs at the moment because I can't really get out on my boat and do some fishing. But I can do bushwalking and I can read all of those wonderful books that are staring at me on my shelf. And I won't have to feel guilty about catching up on Netflix.
That's exactly right.
So I would want to encourage people, and I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Take a piece of paper and list at least 20, if you can 30, things that you have done in the past that you found enjoyable. Stick it on the fridge, and when you feel a bit anxious and you feel a bit overwhelmed, go to that list, pick one, and just go out and do it. Yeah.
I think a lot of the good or helpful things from that scheduling pleasant activities idea too is that you can often link in some of those other wonderful things that we're aware of that help people cope during this season. So, for example, if it's something like going for a walk, well, we know that that is something that might hack your happy hormones and make you feel better and release all those, feel-good hormones. But going for a walk is obviously really good for our bodies, and we know that's good for our brains. And if we can then even perhaps use that as an opportunity to connect with another person, then that is also a way in which we can support our well-being and our capacity to cope during this time. So it's nice to be able to marry up some of those ideas with, the other ways in which we cope during this season. So, yeah.
Connection is important, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And maybe if I would have to think about one thing that people often say, Joe, I miss those barbecues, or I miss hugging my loved ones.
Yeah.
What do you find in
Yeah,
that?
oh, absolutely. I was chatting to some teenagers the other day, asking them about what they're finding difficult, and invariably the response, particularly for our teenagers and young adults, or probably for our older adults as well, I think, is just that grief in losing that connection with their friends. Look, thank goodness for social media and for digital platforms where people can still connect, and I think that's been a really wonderful thing where people have used those avenues to continue connecting with others. But look, there's definitely a grief and a loss in that, missing that face-to-face connection with others. I know I desperately miss having coffee with my friends and going out for dinner and sitting around with people and talking, and that's been incredibly difficult, I think, for me. But look, I guess we've become quite creative in the ways we connect with others, and that's been a really positive thing. So obviously FaceTime has been great, and Zoom and texting has been a wonderful way in which we can connect with others. But look, I think it's fair to acknowledge that missing that face-to-face contact has been really hard.
I have a regular coffee drink session. Actually, we have breakfast with 5 other men, and we now do that on Zoom.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a strange feeling in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we actually tremendously enjoy that hour and a half.
Oh, that's wonderful.
There's a bit of a positive side to it. You don't have to get into your car and dress up. You can sit there in your, in your tracksuit and have a coffee with your friends.
Yeah.
Connection's so important.
Yeah, I don't think it really can be underestimated. I guess we've been created for relationship with God and relationship with others. But look, I think actually there's a wonderful study that's been around for many years. I think it started in about 1938. It was a Harvard study. It's still in production today. And it's a fascinating study. It's a longitudinal study. And it looks at basically what are the best predictors of people's happiness. It's a fascinating study, and it looks at lots of different factors that contribute to people's happiness in life. So it measures things like IQ, things like socioeconomic status, even things like hard work. And this study basically, in its attempt to answer this question, what predicts future happiness, the results have been consistently reliable over many, many years. And the results have shown us actually that its connection with people, so friends and family and with communities, is above and beyond the most significant predictor of people's happiness. So I think during this season, when we're feeling perhaps at times really lonely or disconnected, it's important to realise that that's understandable and it's probably normal, but there are things that we can do to maintain those connections with people. So I think thinking creatively and using a lot of the available resources that we have is a way in which we can continue those connections with people.
Yeah. You know, as we are talking about what can we do, one thing that also comes to mind is our perspective on things. People are very keen to talk about what was said at 11 a.m. this morning, and even people who didn't really, pay too much attention to the news are now keen to know what is happening with our COVID cases and so on. And it's almost like what's happening in our environment is focusing our attention and is changing our perspective. We become less than. And we almost forget that we are actually more than, and we have different aspects of our lives and so on. There's a wonderful picture that I came across that illustrates this. Have a look at this elephant. And the question is, I want you to count the legs of the elephant. Look, if you are like me, it's a bit of a frustrating exercise, isn't it? It's like the elephant keeps on growing legs. But what we can do for a moment is just, and I would encourage people to do this, is close your eyes and see that elephant in your mind and see how easy it is to count the legs. Of course, an elephant has 4 legs. And we need to be careful that in this time that our perspective of our whole life is not impacted in a way that we start thinking so negatively. Again, we can talk about this for days maybe, but one aspect of perspective I would love to highlight is living in Australia is amazing.
Absolutely.
And there are people in the rest of the world that as they are impacted by COVID, are actually impacted in a much different way. So just taking that moment and saying we are so thankful and so grateful that we can be in a wonderful country like this.
Absolutely.
Another perspective is we have a perspective of eternal life. And in that sense, our life on earth is but a little bit of a blurb in terms of what we are going to experience living eternally in the presence of God. So sometimes it's important to say, let's take our eyes away from the stats. Lift it a little bit and see God. And just know that He, as our loving Father, has all of this in His hand. Why don't we take the perspective of how can I grow in this time? How can I improve my resilience? How can I use the things that you and I are talking about to grow as a person and assist other people through this. Hey, we are talking about what we can do. But you know, and I certainly, I am experiencing this, that more people are seeking help.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what do you think? Is there a place for asking for help in this time?
Yeah. Look, Joe, I really can't highlight that enough. I agree. I think during this time, more and more people are putting their hand up and asking for support and acknowledging that they're in a difficult space or that life is hard or that they're perhaps spiralling down. And there's definitely been, I think, an increase in people asking for help, and I think that's wonderful. And I think that's a really helpful approach for those people and for those people around them. So, look, as you said before, I think it's understandable and it's normal that people are struggling in this time. Sure, there are some things that are outside of our control that we can't change or manipulate, but equally there are many things that are within our control that we can use at our fingertips to support our mental health and our coping strategies. But look, I think it's vital that people acknowledge that sometimes their capacity to cope has actually tipped over the edge, and perhaps they're in a dark place or they're in a place in which they would really benefit from professional help. And so I would say to those people, look, please contact your local GP, or perhaps if you have a psychologist that you see, go and see your psychologist or even a psychiatrist. But really, it's important, I think, to acknowledge that people sometimes do need that extra layer of support during this time. And it doesn't mean that that will be forever. It may just be for this season. It may be a lifelong support that they choose to or that they need to adopt. But whatever it is that people need to get through in this season, I would encourage people to take that step. And you can see up here on the slide, there are a number of support avenues that people can explore. There's some websites there and there are some phone numbers there that people can call. All of those phone numbers are 24/7 numbers so that they're available 24 hours, 7 days a week. So there's always support for people that need it.
There are people who need support and who need that extra help, but they are a little bit scared to go, isn't it? What would other people think of me if they find out I'm seeing a psychologist? Or how do I even go to my GP and acknowledge that I'm struggling with my mood? And we encourage everyone, I do that, is be mindful of people around you, people you work with, people that you live with, and ask them whether they would like you to support them to go and find some help. Sometimes just holding the hand of someone that goes to the GP with you.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's just that little bit extra that is necessary for someone that will reach out and get the help that they need. And we can help them. This is the good news.
Absolutely, that's right. Yep. I see lots of teenagers that come to see me that actually like to bring a friend with them. And I encourage that if that's what they need to seek that extra layer of help and support, then I think that's wonderful that they do that.
So in psychology, then, there are evidence-based strategies and methodologies that really help people to deal with this kind of a challenge better and grow as a result of it.
Yep, exactly. Yep. All right. Well, Joe, I think I don't know if there's anything more that we'd like to add to this conversation about ways in which people can cope or learn to, I guess, adapt in this current season, in this season of unpredictability and uncertainty. I think, look, I guess one of the main things I would like to highlight, I guess, is just that God is sovereign and that He is in control. And look, there are a number of Bible verses that I have found really encouraging over the last couple of months, but one of my favourite is this one from Ecclesiastes, and it highlights the fact that there are different seasons in our lives and that some of those seasons are difficult, some of them are really pleasurable, but that above and beyond, through all of those seasons of our life, I guess God is sovereign and He's with us through those difficult times. So He goes before us with all things, and and he leads the way, and he knows what lies ahead, and that we can trust him. But I guess in this difficult season, I think it's helpful to remember that it's part of that tapestry of human experience, and that God is with us through that, and we can rely on him.
Well, talking of perspective, I think that's an awesome perspective to have, that our Father is in control.
Yep.
And he can help us, and he will help us through this. Hey, this was good.
Yes, great.
Thank you so much for what you are doing for our kids and helping
Pleasure.
them through this difficult time.
Yep. And thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for all your wonderful, wise insights and to the ways in which you've been able to support so many people that come to you for help. So thank you.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much, Joe and Sophie. That was absolutely brilliant. I just want to extend my appreciation for all the time, thought and effort you have put into tonight. And please, if you've joined us tonight and if you need any help or an encouragement, please reach out to us as a church, because we are here to serve and help you. God bless, and thanks again for joining us.